Any challenge or suffering we may face in this life, no matter how great it is never void of the benefits or gifts if we have a heart and eyes to truly see them. Welcome to the Q4 Impact Podcast, where through scripture, story, and conversation, we inspire you to make an impact all the way through the fourth quarter of your life. It's been said that the main point of a preposition is to show the direction of something. So the preposition in the name of our topic today, gifts from cancer, was carefully crafted to denote that cancer can truly be the source of good things in our lives. Now, if you heard me say that and you reacted or doubts started to rise up in you, we want to invite you to stay tuned to today's episode to learn about what those gifts can be. So you may see, if you're watching on YouTube, that we are privileged to be joined today by Sherry Blackman, who has navigated in more than one season of her life some of the darkest horrors that cancer can bring. Yet she is still here to proclaim the gifts that come from cancer. So Sherry holds BAs in Religious Studies and English Literature, as well as her MDiv from Fuller Theological Seminary. She's an ordained pastor, and for the last several years has served at Oaks Christian School in Westlake Village, California, where she was initially the founding department chair and has also held roles as a Bible teacher, a chaplain, and now currently is teaching as an English instructor. So Sherry, thank you for joining me and Ron today and for your willingness to use your story to encourage others.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, it's very nice to be here, and I like your introduction as an English teacher to focus on prepositions because they're small words, but they can pack a punch.
Yes, they can.
So, Sherry, Susan introduced you with what I would call your professional bio, and now I'd just like to invite you to share something about yourself personally and to introduce your own experience with cancer.
Okay. Well, I have a wonderful husband of 44 years, Rick. He's a clinical psychologist, so it's really nice to have a shrink in the house. And then I have 3 sons and daughters-in-law and 2 grandchildren and another grandchild to come pretty soon in October. So we're very excited about that. Yeah. My first experience with cancer was in 2002. And I had ductal breast cancer, and I had to go through the whole rigmarole with chemo and radiation. And that was hard because in those years, they didn't have what they call the agents, all these helpful drugs that enable you not to experience the side effects. And so it was very, very rough. Then I kind of put it in the rearview mirror, and 17 years later, I discovered more. And this time it was lobular breast cancer. And so that was in 2019. And that led me on a long journey because it was a very difficult situation. So I'm now 5 years out from that.
Which is wonderful. I'm glad that you are. And I appreciate your willingness, again, just to use your journey and some of what you've learned through it. And as you and I spoke in preparation for this, one of the things that you began to talk about was what you and your husband, Rick, put together through the process. And you called it the acceptance scale. And I know that based on our earlier conversation, I think it's safe to say that as you personally navigated your own cancer journey through the framework of that scale, that is what helped to you recognize the gifts from your cancer. Is that accurate?
Oh, yes. That scale, I'll just briefly mention it. And if you'd like, I can take you in more detail through it. But the scale is, it starts with when this has to do with a disruptor, and it can be any kind of disruptor. Most disruptors, you don't welcome them in your life. They're very difficult and they disorient your life. And so the first reaction is to push it away, and I call it condemn. You want to just, and there's different ways that people do that. Some people get engulfed in it. They get so attached that they can't separate themselves out from it. And then other people get, they deny it, they push it away, and they try to, just cope with it. So that's the first reaction we have. And then the second one I call endure, but it's really a short-term endurance. It's just figuring out a way to cope with it. And basically, you cannot think about the future. You just have to think in the now, and you have to put your head down and just burrow through it. The third one is tolerate, and that's where you begin to have a long-term perspective. And you begin to realize that you can deal with discomfort, and you sort of build your discomfort muscles. And what you try to do is not to say when this is over or when I return to normal. And so you just begin to tolerate it. The next one is acceptance. That's a deeper sort of tolerating it. And this is where you start to notice the gifts from cancer, the compassion it builds, the connection with other people, the opportunities to talk to people, especially talk to people about Christ and about comfort and his overseeing and being in control. And this acceptance part is really deep. It's where you begin to realize that, I have to lose my life to gain my life. That's not only a biblical principle, it's true in our lives. And so we begin to let go, and we begin to analyze the loss and what that loss signifies for us. So there's lament in that stage, but that lament leads to letting go and to accepting it. And then the last one is embrace. Now I have to say, this one is not necessary for not everyone can get there, and it's not necessary. Like I have a friend whose son committed suicide, and she will never get to the point of embracing it. And I don't think it's necessary. It's just a nice completion to the acceptance in which you realize the lessons that pain taught, and you just are so desperate to hold on to those lessons. You don't want to go back to the way things were. And so that to me is one of the main gifts from cancer, just the gratitude you have about life.
As I hear you explain the stages of this scale, it makes me think of the stages of grief with which many of us are familiar. And that scale begins with denial and at times and ends in acceptance, similar to your last stage of embrace. What we know about the stages of grief is that we don't necessarily experience them in an orderly or linear fashion. In fact, the process is oftentimes pretty messy. Is this the same for the scale about which you were talking about?
Absolutely. I like to talk about it as a scale, and it does have a linear aspect to it, but it is not linear. Because our life is not a before and after story. It is we're always going back. I mean, sometimes we make a little progress, then we go back, a step back, 2 steps back, step forward. But ultimately, the scale the idea is that you would keep moving forward, but you don't beat yourself up because you're not moving forward. I mean, life disruptors are just very difficult.
Yeah, they really are. And everyone's journey is so unique. And of course, the Lord in our lives as believers is faithfully leading us through these as well, I believe, as we embrace him and seek to have eyes and hearts to see. So I love that you laid the framework. I want to take us a little more deep on a personal level now. So we already ascertained that this scale helped you in your journey be able to recognize the gifts from your cancer. So can you just explain a bit more of how that actually worked and what are some of these gifts that you have experienced along the way?
Okay, thank you. Great question. At first, the condemn stage is, the way I see it is there's probably a lot of ways to react, but there tend to be 2 ways. One is, like I said before, you're so engulfed in the emotion of it that I like to see it as you're so attached to it that you can't get distance from it. And this has pros and cons. Another way to deal with it is to deny it. And that's really my style. it's sort of, I've got to buckle down. I have to fight. I have to endure. You see the task ahead of you, and you just cannot allow yourself the emotions. And so for me, both times it was that way. The second time I realized more that I have a tendency to do that. And so I tried to not shut off my feelings as much, but it was so hard because the road was so difficult. And I felt like if I pay attention to my emotions, I won't be able to make it. But so the second approach that I tend to have is more of a detached approach. And for me, it took a while for everything to sink in. It was almost like, this isn't me. I see myself as healthy. Even though I've had cancer twice, I still see myself as healthy. And so then it took a while a long time until I really realized what was happening. So then I went to Endure. And one of the things with Endure is that you have to corral the fear and the anxiety. It needs to be sort of contained. And you can't do that sometimes directly because, anxiety is, it's not rational. And you can't tell yourself, okay, don't be anxious. You have to do it indirectly. And for me, the foundation is God and God's love and providence in my life. And so that helps me to just be in the moment. And I developed this little strategy years ago that helped me. It's called Look Down. And I was riding a mountain bike up a really steep hill once. And I decided, okay, I'm going to just look at the ground below me. And I actually tricked my brain into thinking it was flat. I couldn't do that too long. I did it till I got to the top. But I realized a really important principle there that when something is really difficult and acute, you have to just look down at the ground. You have to look at what's ahead, what you have to deal with. And for me, in the second cancer journey, which was much more difficult because I entered stage 3 and I had multiple tumors, and I just decided I was going to look at each day, and I was going to look at the tasks of the day and the joys of the day. And so I could not look beyond it. You cannot look at the future when you're trying to endure it. The third one, tolerate, that is where I really had to come to grips with, I'm not in control. I really don't know why I got cancer twice. I don't have any of the indicators, but that's okay. I'm not going on the internet to try and figure it all out. I don't know the answers. And that's kind of where I came to this idea of life after why. It's fruitless to ask why. To me, it is. And you just have to kind of pick up and say, what am I to do? And so during that stage, I really fought against the desire to be normal. And I just had to tell myself, do not ask those questions like, when is this over? When am I going to be normal? And because those were very counterproductive. So I just had to accept my new normal. There's a book called The Second Mountain by David Brooks, I think it is. And he talks about how when you experience an important loss or a failure or something in your career, then you can go from your first mountain, which is achievement, to your second mountain, which is living a life after the loss, living a good life after the loss. And that became really important to me. So that tolerance was, really helpful. And then acceptance. I really learned the value of lamenting. I'm just not one that likes to lament because, you can tell already from my personality, I want to move forward. But lament was really important. And when I was on my bed with chemo, I just went through a lot of African-American literature. For some reason, I just wanted to experience what they wrote about, and it was very helpful. It helped me with lamenting what has happened with regard to race relations, but more personally, just that everybody has something to lament, and it's good to not push it away. I think sometimes in the Christian church, we want to put a happy smile on things, but there is such a beauty to lamenting. And I got to this from a concert that I attended by Sons of Korah. They're a group from Australia that put the Psalms into words. And the first, I would say, third of the concert was a lament. And it was so incredible because it was in our church. I was sitting there thinking, this is good. This is allowed. This is helpful. And when I started to lament, I realized that lament really does help you let go. And nobody can tell you when your lament should stop. Hopefully it shouldn't go on forever, but you yourself begin to discover when it should stop, and then you move on. So that really helped me. And then during that acceptance phase, I was also really helped by Rick, my husband, who talks about dimensions of loss, that it all has to do with loss, And so there's different kinds of loss. There's concrete loss. I lost a lot of things, and there were lingering elements, things that I didn't expect, like insomnia and stomach issues and mobility, all these additional things. They're almost harder than the cancer journey, but that was concrete loss, but it was also an abstract loss because it was a loss of normality or of, safety and security and control. So coming to grips with the different kinds of loss, like concrete loss or abstract loss or anticipatory loss, where something's going to happen in the future, like hair loss, was really helpful. And then I could kind of categorize it and in my prayers say, Lord, this is what I'm losing. I want to give it to you. And so that's all part of that acceptance part, where you really have to own the new you and own your story. And another passage that was important to me then was, and is still, is the Lord is my portion, or in the Amazing Grace, you are my part, he is my part and portion. That was so helpful. This is my story, and my story has wounds, and I don't want to move beyond those wounds. With my first cancer diagnosis, I put it in the rearview mirror. I moved on. With this one, I didn't want to, because I wanted to remember, and that led me to that embracing. I couldn't believe how many gifts there were. Like one time I was in the infusion room, and I had such a high experience there one time, because I would always talk to people. I had a really special nurse, and she told me her whole story about loss, and I won't go into it, but I couldn't believe I was in this infusion room, and I was feeling like God was using me to help this lady and to listen to her story. And she was helping me, of course. And so I just got to feeling like, wow, I can't believe I'm feeling this way in an infusion room, which can be so depressing. So then I started to really shift my attention from what is lost to what remains. And I got that from a great book called The Gift. I think it was called The Gift by Edith Eger. She was in a concentration camp, and she survived it. And she talked about how she moved from seeing from what was lost, which was almost everything, to seeing what remained. And it's a beautiful book. And so then I realized that there is joy in hardship. And that to me is the most important thing, that you don't have to try to do away with the hardship or the bad feelings, or think about, after the hardship's over, but there's joy in it, right in it, because joy and sorrow coincide. And I got a lot of that from Kate Bowler. She went through cancer at a young age, and she talks about the beautiful and the terrible, and those come together. They're present at the same time. And that was just so helpful. So these are some of the things I learned.
Thank you for sharing.
Ooh, Sherry, this is it's rich. It's so real, and it's part of what Susan and I talk about so often. Is that sometimes in Christian circles, We don't get the story behind the story. We just get the headlines of, Sherry had cancer and she overcame, and, it's as if there's no struggle in the process. And of course, there's always struggle. For the best of us has to wrestle with these really, really difficult things. I especially like your use of the word portion, as it captures a theme that, Susan, we talk about often on our podcasts. And none of us is going to be exempt from what you would call life disruptors. It may not be cancer, though a recent statistic we came across from the National Cancer Institute says that about 40% of all men and women will be diagnosed with cancer at some point during their lifetimes. So whatever the life disruptor may be, we at Q4 Impact believe the way we prepare and then persevere is really important, and a key to how well we face our heartaches and our troubles. And isn't that the main thing? It's not how we do on vacation, that makes a big difference in life. It's how we do when we face trouble. That's the distinguishing part of our journey. And so I haven't read your book yet, but I am going to order it as soon as I hang up and get myself a copy. And my wife and I are in the early stages of her cancer journey, which I'm say our cancer journey. And so thank you for processing it and for articulating it so well. And thank you for just the way you've lived through this. I think it's a strength to many.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to jump on what you just said about Sherry's book and take this opportunity to hold it up for those that are watching. It is called Life After Why: Finding My Footing and Purpose in a Life Disruptor. And it talks about so much more than just Sherry's cancer story. It also explores universal themes of loss, abuse, control, dislocation, being an outsider, and then finding one's own voice. Sherry, I will say, Ron, I was very blessed. Sherry sent me a copy. I am almost done with it, and I have thoroughly enjoyed reading it. And I know that if you choose to get this, and it can be acquired on Amazon, and we'll link to that in our show notes, but it will just be such an encouragement to you. So that being said, I think I've probably mentioned on this podcast before that I'm also a cancer survivor. So Sherry and I had an immediate connection, and there are some elements of our stories that are similar. And like Sherry, I have also been very blessed to experience many gifts from my own cancer journey. Some that I know we have talked about sharing is a sense of community that arose out of that and made such a difference in the way that we were able to navigate it, both while we battled cancer and even beyond. I think another one for me, and again, that we both share, and Sherry, I'm going to use the phrase that you shared with me, and I read it in your book, and I loved it. I've shared it with several people, is memento mori, which is to remember that we are mortal. And there's something, I was still very young when I battled cancer. And at that stage in my life, I knew where I was going. I was going to heaven. I was a follower of Jesus. But the thought of death was not something that was even a passing thought very often. And there's nothing quite like cancer to make you face that and to recognize our smallness and God's bigness and his greatness, and to come to that place of we are not promised tomorrow. So how are we going to live today? And you spoke about that, Sherry, and focusing on the now, on the today that you have. And that is the same for all of us in whatever life disruptor we may be facing. So I am going to begin to wrap us up. Before I do that, Sherry, is there anything else that you would like to add at this time?
Well, one of the things I came to the truths I came to was that God doesn't owe me anything. I'm not in a contractual relationship with God. I remember when I first went with my second bout, the first surgery, it was supposed to be 8.5 hours and it was only 5. And they were saying, oh, it went so well and everything. Then in the middle of the night, it started to fail because I had a transplant. And so I had to be wheeled out for an emergency surgery, and there ended up being 4 of those. But I remember Rick was asleep and his phone was off, so they couldn't reach him. So I was alone. And I remember being wheeled into the emergency room, the operating room. And for just a moment, I was looking up at the ceiling, and my friend had shared with me Psalm 139 the day before. It almost like downloaded past the drugs, and I saw it very clearly. Where can I go from your presence? And I realized this is what I need. This is all I need. This is what it comes down to, is God's presence. He doesn't owe me answers. He doesn't, it's not like I do this, you do that, but it's your presence is there, and that's ultimately what is needed. So that experience really took me through that time. And I always want to move on, but I realized that, the normal that I wanted was really not what I wanted, because once you return to normal, you forget and you start getting involved in the pettiness of life. And I realized I don't want that. I want to live beyond normal. I want to live in gratitude for God's presence in my life and just enjoy the wonderful world He's created. And I do love nature and gardening.
And you're doing it. And I love that. And what you're sharing through your book and through your willingness to share on this podcast and in other ways that you give of yourself, it's allowing you to hold on. And that holding on is blessing so many. So again, thank you. I'm going to wrap us up by actually reading a portion from Sherry's book. It's on page 16, and it's just a paragraph. It says, "There are no pragmatic or triumphalist claims that the gains make the loss worthwhile, even good. There is the recognition that God works for the good through it all, because God is good. So we can trust God. We don't grab, clutch, or control these gifts, but receive them as they are grace deposits that come unbidden. Appreciation and gratitude shift the focus from what is lost to what remains. Our scars are a part of our story and are the new possibilities we discover after letting go. It is possible to experience a satisfying life after a life disruptor." So friends, as we close, we know that cancer may not be the life disruptor that you face. Maybe it is. But whatever your life disruptor has been or is or may be even starting tomorrow, remember that there are gifts to be found from that. More than any specific gift, they all start in what Sherry just said, finding God's presence with you in the midst of that life disruptor. So would you press in to find God in the midst of it and apply what Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, to trust in the Lord with all your heart and to not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways, know Him, and He will make your paths straight. Sherry, thank you again for being with us today and pointing to the goodness of God with your words and with your story.
Thank you. God is good.
Yes, He is. And we invite you again to join us next week as Ron and I will be talking about overcoming shattered dreams. Thanks for listening. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Q4 Impact Podcast. To continue receiving encouragement and practical tips on how to live with purpose and meaning through the many changes and challenges of life, please be sure to subscribe. And please share it with others you think may also benefit.